Okay, welcome everyone to. Is it?
Not yet, not yet.
Is the
Okay, welcome everyone to. Is it?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, welcome everyone to.
What is?
Not yet.
Okay, welcome everyone.
Start, Tom. You can start.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the first out of a series of 6 webinars.
Start, Tom.
6
You can start.
Okay, great.
webinars of young-led climate change.
Out of a series of 6 webinars.
I'm sorry, but the sound was so okay. So welcome everyone again. Was sorry for the sound effects earlier. This is the first out of a series of 6 young-led climate webinars, and we will be talking about climate change. Climate change may be the issue that our generation is facing, and most of all, it isn't a problem for youth and the yet still unborn. When the old fail to address our problems, we, the young, have to step up as leaders to protect our future. And this webinar, luckily and fortunately, will tell you exactly how to do that. So first of all, do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end. And second of all, let me introduce our speakers and our discussants. Our first speaker is Max van Deursen. He is a former youth representative on sustainability, education, and sustainable development to the United Nations. Also, he has co-founded the movement Miles That Matter, which aims to promote sustainable travel. Furthermore, he has a degree in global challenges. And next up, we will have Monica Bouwman. She is a psychologist and researcher. She graduated on the spirituality and the political ethics of Dag Hammarskjöld, who was involved in the founding of the United Nations. And she believes that he is an ideal role model for daring leadership. Then we have our discussant. She is called Andy Dian Rosahindita, and she has worked for 5 years in an economic development program with Mercy Corps Indonesia. And she has pursued her master's degree in management and development, and she specialized in that master's degree in social inclusion, gender, and youth. So there we are. I will finally introduce myself. I am a member of the Youth for Climate organization, who has started school strikes, which involved more than 15,000 pupils at once, and which was great. The greater thing was that after that we were invited by the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, to come to his office and talk about climate change and how the young can participate in that. So, I think we are ready for our first presentation by Max van Deursen. Max, give it away. You have to unmute your mic, Max.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Okay.
That's better. Thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, I've worked for quite a time with different youth organizations. I've been a Dutch youth representative to the United Nations on sustainable development for 2 years. Co-founded the Miles That Matter movement to promote more sustainable travel and some other things on the side for like over 5 years or something now. So a good moment to reflect on what does this mean to be among these youth climate leaders? And to do this, I thought, let's look at some myths surrounding youth climate leadership. So I'll give a presentation with 3 myths and 1 way forward on youth climate leadership based on my experiences. So I'm going to move to a small slideshow that I made. Let's give me a minute. I think it should be this one. share. Okay, so if all is right, you can see the slideshow now. So let's go on with the first myth. When I went to my first climate conference, I still remember, to the COP25 in Paris, I had this idea that...
Sorry, Max, you have to click the share button.
Oh yeah. Wait, let me check. I think it should be sharing now. Oh, sorry. I think there was like a delay in the things. Apology for that. But to recap where I left, when I went to my first climate conference, I had this vision like all young people are going to come together. They're going to have the same idea. They're going to come up with one way on how to do it and share this message. But in reality, I realized that it was sometimes actually quite difficult to get all young people on one line and support one statement. And perhaps that's also not necessarily a good thing to try and get this diversity of opinions of young people into one statement. Especially now that we moved forward a little bit in the climate action, and we moved towards the stage of implementation. And in that sense, I think it's becoming more and more of an issue of getting this diverse ideas of opinions of how to implement actually this climate action, and that also deserves this wide range of ideas and opinions. So perhaps getting always all young people under one quotation and with the same thing is not necessarily a good idea. The second myth, and let me try to do the screen share again. Let's see. And the second myth, that you have to go to an international conference or one of these other big events to become a climate leader or a youth climate leader. I think that's just a myth as well, because for me in the beginning it might be a little bit of how it started. Like you go to this conference and at once there are a lot of people work on this. You go to panels and get invited. But later on, I actually became to realize more and more that the real leadership is actually something that happens, when you're back at home, basically. At the international conference, you don't really need to convince anyone that climate change is a concerning issue, but try to tell it to your neighbor, and it might become a real challenge. And actually getting people, out of the bubble, basically involved, that is where real climate leadership happens. You can also see it, for example, with Greta, with the school strikes. That's also something that started really, really small, but has a huge impact, and it's definitely classified as leadership. So I think that's another element. Okay, then we have the third myth that I came up with, and let me share this one with you. Youth climate leaders are immune to the rat race. Let me tell a little bit about this. I'm also going to stop sharing the screen so that you can see me again. I think in the beginning, when I entered the scene, I had the idea like young people, they are not concerned as much with money or power or all these things of getting the best and the more and the everything, but more concerned with meaningful things and everything. But I realized there is one glitch to it, especially among young people who are working on climate change. And that's something called, the whole impact thing, basically. Also, after some time, I realized that quite often I was sitting in meetings with other young people, and we would spend almost the whole meeting talking about how everybody was making impact, talking about how they could become bigger, scale up. It's of course important to make impact, but it was becoming sort of the GDP of success of a young person in this climate world. And I think that's actually quite dangerous. And also know a lot of young people who actually get that it really becomes too much for them. So I think it's also important to value the other aspects of youth climate leadership, which could be having fun, for example, in what you do, having good relations with other people you work with other young people, with other people in general, and actually also being satisfied with what you achieve, actually, and not always striving for bigger, more and more impact, because it might actually become counter effective. At least that's something that I believe. Then I promised also, after these 3 myths, to provide a way forward. So for that, I'm going to share my screen again. Let's share and move on here. And this is a framework that was developed by one of the people who graduated at my same university, a framework for meaningful youth participation by Martine de Zoete. And it's basically, you can also apply it for youth climate leadership. It departs a little bit from what we used to have as a very hierarchical approach as to how successful young people are in leadership or in participation, that you have like a really ladder where you can move upwards to, towards a more dynamic and circular idea, which starts on the left with developing ideas and opinions as a crucial point of becoming a youth climate leader. And this also means that this developing ideas should happen in diversity. So we don't want all young people to come up with the same ideas and the same opinions, but we actually want diversity. And then once you have these ideas as a young leader, you also want to share your perspectives, because if you don't have any followers, you can also not really call yourself a leader. But sharing these perspectives is not necessarily something you need to do at the international conference or only at these kind of things. But sharing perspectives particularly starts with people very close to you and in your own community. So I think that's also a very important part of this dynamic. And then finally, you have this continued participation and follow through. And classically, I think we often see this follow through in terms of impact and how many people do you reach, how many newspaper articles, how many blog posts, whatever. But I think we also need to depart from that sense. Impact is only one part of this continued participation. And other parts are also having fun, having satisfaction, having good relations with other people you work with. I think we need to bring that back into the skill set of a good young climate leader. And then again, this framework also shows that it's a dynamic process. If you make impact, your ideas might also change, and then the whole circle starts again. Something which perhaps also happened to me in working with new projects, getting new ideas, and going through the circle again and again. So that was my short take on youth climate leadership, on a few myths that I discussed that might be good food for discussion and further thought, and a short way forward to take a different look on what youth climate leadership is. Thank you very much for listening, and I give the floor back to Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Max, for your very interesting and curiosity-driven presentation. Next up, we will immediately commence with the presentation of Monica. So, Monica, you have the floor.
Okay. Do I have to do something?
No, you can immediately start right now.
Screen? Okay.
You can start your presentation, Monica.
Thank you, Sharif. Yes. Hello, everyone. You don't see me at the moment, but I like to share my presentation on daring leadership first before speaking and coming into discussion with you. Can we start now?
Yes, please.
Please, the first one. Our daring leadership, Dag Hammarskjöld, is a role model. Our Earth matters. In our globalized world, we must face That's the first one. I will give sign when we go to the second one. In our globalized world, we must face the expected negative effects of climate change in the next 30 years and decide how to act responsibly, politically, and wise. What we badly need is a rise of daring leaders. According to Brené Brown, a leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and who has the courage to develop that potential. Are you ready to lead? Next, please. Daring is saying, I know I will eventually fail, and I'm still in. Early 1955, UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld took great risks when he visited China to meet Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai to negotiate a conflict resolution. Next, please. To me, Dag Hammarskjöld is a role model in daring leadership. He was a man of courage and integrity, and he paved new ways for the United Nations, making it function as a creative instrument for world peace. Next, please. In the end, this brought him into a difficult position, as this cartoon shows. How could he best use his leadership skills? How could he get the commitment of political leaders for shared purposes? And how could he share with them a culture of belonging and inclusivity? Only by sticking to his values, anyhow, by practicing integrity. Daring leadership cost his life. On 18 September 1961, on a diplomatic mission in Africa, he died in a plane crash. Until now, it's unclear, was it an accident or was the plane shut down and Hammarskjöld murdered? Maybe we shall never know. But the world recognized his daring leadership, and after his death, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize 1961. Next, please. What does it mean to be a daring leader? According to Brené Brown, you first and foremost have to practice integrity. You must face your vulnerability and engage in dialogue and self-reflection. So did Hammarskjöld. This was his quest for maturity. We, as readers, can follow Hammarskjöld in markings, his spiritual diary. After his death, his friends found the manuscript of Hammarskjöld's spiritual diary. In a letter found together with the manuscript, Hammarskjöld explains, "These are my negotiations with myself and God." Thus practicing integrity, he strengthened a strong back, soft front, and wild heart. Next, please. Feeling needed and recognized makes you willing to bring the best of you, makes you saying yes. That's why knowing your value is important. Once you are in a group where everyone understands their value, everyone can contribute from his or her gifts. Getting clear about our value will create lanes where none might have existed before. Next, please. COP25, the UN Climate Change Conference this year in Chile, will cultivate commitment and shared purposes under UN member states, civil society organizations, universities, and knowledge centers. Next, please. Here you see the winners and organizers of a youth leadership camp for climate change 2017 in Sumatra, Indonesia. Daring leaders want people to lead themselves and to deliver above and beyond expectations. They create context and color. How can you cultivate commitment and contribution? How can you give team members the space and the trust to stretch and learn? How can you allow joy and creativity to be found in even the smallest task? Next, please. Daring leaders make sure people can be themselves and feel a sense of belonging. On this world map, you see the state participants of the Bandung Conference 1955, hosted by Indonesia. The conference expressed their wish for the end of colonialism, for independence, international cooperation, and membership of the UN. Daring leadership was shown by President Sukarno of Indonesia, Prime Minister Nehru of India, Prime Minister Zhou Enlai of China, and President Nasser of Egypt. That was in 1955. Next, please. Daring leaders fight for the inclusion of all people, opinions, and perspectives, because that makes us all better and stronger. So we must have the courage to acknowledge our own privilege and to stay open to learning about our biases and blind spots. In our world of today, climate change will confront us with state instability. How can we help preventing and resolving conflicts caused by water scarcity, demography, crop decline, hunger, and coastal risks? Next, please. Finally, to inspire each of you to engage in daring leadership, 2 quotes from Hammarskjöld. The first one is from Markings. You dare your yes and experience a meaning. You repeat your yes and all things acquire a meaning. When everything has a meaning, how can you live anything but a yes? And finally, working at the edge of the development of human society is to work on the brink of the unknown. Thank you for your, thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for your inspiring presentation. We are now going to ask some questions of clarification. So, Monica, your presentation was very inspiring, but what I think what the audience might want to know is if they want to start to change their life tomorrow, where should they begin?
As a baby or as an adult, should they begin? I think they have to begin with their own values. What is important in your life? Who do you care for? Who do you like to take care for? Also, to what is your responsibility? But being responsible for others doesn't work if you do not start being responsible to yourself. So first you have to accept the person you are and to love yourself. And then it's very important to know that behind the mountains there are other people, and that you live together, and social relations are very important. And it starts in the family.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
And Max, are you online? Yes.
Yes, present.
Okay, great. Then I would like to answer kind of the same question to ask, not to answer, to ask the same question to you as to Monica, like, because you had a story about how a climate leader is not someone far away at some UN conference, but maybe someone in your own neighborhood or somewhere in a region or a municipality. So do you have any practical advice for people who want to start doing something?
Yeah, I also think a lot of people are already doing a lot of things, even though they might not get the credit or the label of "whoa, you're a climate leader," but they just already do this. So that's maybe also a difference. But as I mentioned before, like how do you do this? one thing, as I also showed in the mention, it also often starts with developing ideas and opinions. Or so also what Monica mentioned, start with the values. So what are things you really like to do, or things you find very interesting, or things you're already doing but want to expand? For example, in your neighborhood, if you really like plants, you might want to start a small community garden, or start with your own garden and then expand. Or if you really are more engaged into politics, give it a go as a young person and try to get in perhaps the municipality governance involved. Or if you're living as a student in a student house, you might try and get your other students to get a more like recycling system in place, which I also once tried, and is also a whole challenge in itself. And once you develop these things, you can start in sharing these perspectives and continue on with it. For example, also I mentioned before, I started the Master Matter movement on sustainable travel, which is also something that started very small, actually, that I like traveling a lot. I like traveling slowly, as they say, by train or by other transport means. And yeah, the planes are just very polluting, so I try to avoid them. And then I first I went by train to Paris, and then to Bonn, and then within Europe. And then once I made a train trip to Marrakesh in Morocco for the climate conference, everything by train and back. And it started to become more and more. And then eventually I made this really big trip by train to Malaysia and back to Malaysia to really create this more bigger impact, but also something I just really enjoyed. So I think, just start with small steps, look into the things you like to do, and build on from there and see where it goes.
Okay, yeah, I think you've mentioned quite a few very interesting perspectives on what you are able to do just tomorrow, starting tomorrow, and what your options are. Just follow your interests, get to know your values again, what Monica already said. So maybe there's just time just to share my own, like what I started up. So just over 2 months ago, I went to my head of school and I said, why cannot we put solar panels on the roof of the school? And she was like, yeah, there are already solar panels on top of the school. So I went to ask the specific person, and turns out there was no promotion whatsoever about it, but there were. But the thing is, there were only very few, like maybe 5 or something. So I asked, the roof is much bigger than that, so cannot we put more? And then they were like, no, it was just an experiment, it's not possible. And so time went by, and you're a student and you need to put in a lot of time in school. And then after some time I came across this woman, and they had this project set up, this huge fund, and there suddenly was money to buy the solar panels and to put solar panels on the whole roof. And that's what we're starting to do right now. So that's another interesting story.
Wow.
And we're about, it's time right now to give the discussant the floor so she can give her feedback on what we just heard. So the floor is yours, Andy.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Tom. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, great.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank Max and Monica for the presentation. As for me, it was an eye-opener session, and also maybe for the audience as well, that can contribute our knowledge related to the leadership concepts and the myths surrounding the leadership itself. For now, I would like to give a brief summary for what I take out from your presentations, and also maybe a little bit feedback of the speaker sessions. And maybe I also have some question regarding the presentation that I can address during the Q&A session. So I will start with Max's presentation. For me, it was very interesting that you present the 3 myths on youth leadership in climate change, and also present one way forward to address it at the end of your presentation. So for me personally, I'm familiar with some of the myths as I spent some years working with youth in some development sector. And I would like to address the myth number one. For me, it also, I take it as a reminder for myself and maybe also for the others to again aware about the importance of the important how important it is for us to aware the and acknowledge the different background from all of the people in the area or in the platform or in the conference that we're in, because they might all have the same understanding about what happened in the climate change, and then the, I don't know, maybe the latest trending in the issue. But however, we sometimes neglected the fact that they face different issue from where they come from, hence the difference of their opinion. So maybe if we can acknowledge it from the beginning, we can do better to address the difference on the opinion to to address the diversity and also come to the conclusion or the policy that can benefit all of us. And also for the second myth, so what I know from my experience in the field, that often the effectiveness or even the ability of a person in leadership are often roughly calculated from the number of international conference they attend, or the number of, I don't know, the discussion panels with the government elite they represent. Although it is not entirely wrong, sometimes we also forget that it is clearly not an absolute standard that we can use to measure a person's leadership ability. Um, Also, sometimes we neglected the fact that there are also young people out there with brilliant ideas who do not have access to the right platform, or even the youth in the rural area who do not even know what happened in the climate change issue, even though they're actually one of the most vulnerable groups to the adverse effect of the climate change, considering that this has direct effect on their livelihoods. And also the last point that for me, it is also important to keep remind us ourselves again and again that our representation in such platform, which with the change to influence the policy making process, come with the cost of other interests who do not have the same change. So it is not only about our personal pride, as you say, as you mentioned in the last meet, but it is in the bigger picture. It's also about the future of our place of living and also the fate of people that's not unborn. So yeah, and I also, as I told you earlier, that I really impressed of the way you address this myth with the concept that you present on the last slide of your presentation. So okay, that's was it for Max. And so I will continue to Monica. uh, yeah, I actually don't know really. I don't really know much about the daring leadership, but I think from your explanation, this concept of leadership can be adapted by young people, especially in the context of climate change. And then you also present the Hammarskjöld. I hope I pronounce it right.
This is difficult.
Yeah, as the role model for young people, because for me myself, I still count it as a young people. I find it quite challenging to find a right role model in leadership. I mean, and then also with the way you explain it, it's really clear for me that I can use Dag Hammarskjöld as one of my role model. And in particular, this your presentation of yours is help us to address one of the questions that we tried to answer from this webinar about the kind of leadership needed in dealing with the climate change and its impact. I also feel like this leadership concept, as far as I know, is embraces and acknowledge vulnerabilities as one of the source of strength to lead instead of hindering, instead of as the hindering factor. And for the young leaders out there, this concept can be used as the reference in leading their constituent to achieve their goal. And furthermore, as Brené Brown also said, It is also important to always seek for the opportunity and then potentials in people and processes, and also has the courage to develop the potential itself. And then also for the last point, I also want to highlight Brené arguments about how we should put integrity as a leader as our key aspect, and which also bring us back to the myth that Max already mentioned to us earlier. So I do really hope that this session could also benefit for all the viewer out there, that we indeed as a young people have changed and have potential to lead the change, especially in the climate change. So Tom, that was it from me. I give the floor back to you.
Thank you. So now we're onto the questions Q&A section. So let me just, I think you, Andy, had some questions to start with.
Yeah.
Then I'll round up the questions from the audience right now. So
Okay.
you can start.
Okay, so I have a questions for Max. I really interesting to your personal experience for the for your movement, and I want to ask maybe your tips to on how to make our personal action create a bigger impact, so that people can notice our personal action. Because as you know, maybe there are a lot of people that already do the things to that contribute to the climate change, but maybe as we can see in the individual level, people might not notice it. And maybe, and you with your experience, I want to ask like what can we do to make our personal action create a bigger impact? Yeah, maybe that's it, Tom, for now.
Okay. Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, we have to be careful with impact, right? Because, no, just kidding. Because impact is of course important, because if we want to change things, and we have to change things if we want to address climate change, then you also need to make impact at the end of the day. So the question, as I would rephrase it, how can we make impact without compromising too much on other factors, or how can we make impact without staring blind on other issues? Well, how to scale up these projects? As I think, one way to do it is also on a first of all, I think it's important to have a gradual scale. Like if you start a project, or if you start an action or a movement, whatever, I think things always have to grow gradually. So as I mentioned with the train story, I also first did a small one, and then a bigger, and things moved on. Whereas if you put your ambitions right at the top of the hill, I think it might sometimes look like, whoa, I'm never going to achieve some really big impact, or the climate problem is so big, I'm never going to solve it on my own. And you also don't have to solve the climate problem on your own. There are a lot of people. So I think one step in making impact is also, because I took a course in leadership at university as well, when I was on exchange in Malaysia, and one of the first things they learned me is you cannot be a leader if you don't have any followers. So a leader is also kind of defined by its followers. So I think if you want to make more impact, you might also need to get other people inspired by your idea, or by your movement, or by whatever you're doing, and try to get them to join you, basically. And also this involves, I really like to use the word inspire rather than, because I think traditionally you used to see that if you want to make more impact, you use like a formal structure, and you use employees, and you use an organization and everything to build up this impact. Whereas now you see that it's really a lot about inspiration. The same you see with the school strikes. That's something that started very small, but had a very strong concept, and then people adopted it. They got interested, and it's also not like Greta on her own got all these people mobilized. She got a few people interested, and then they started to move on and move on. So I think also just start very small, try to get the people that are close to you involved, and then things will grow on if it's a good concept and everything.
Yeah, thank you. And I also have question for Monica. So based on your experience and also the lesson learned from the Hammers Cult, how do you think we can ensure that our representation or our how we lead people to be inclusive, to cultivate the inclusivity and then the difference of the perspective?
Thank you, Andy. I think dialogue is very important. That you invite others to present their vision, their perspective, and that you really are interested, and that you can start a process together, just as Max showed. This was how Hammarskjöld worked from the United Nations. That he acknowledged China and the countries of the Bandung Conference was unheard. It was not welcomed by the other states. So he was for dialogue. Dialogue is very important. You have those two sides: the inner dialogue and dialogue between people working together, sharing ideas, and sharing values. And then you can have a race for perfectionism, or for a career in the climate change world and platforms, as Max told. But I think it's very important that you keep it close to yourself, that you be real, and that you acknowledge what your own vulnerability, and that you see the vulnerability of others, and so that you can really be open-minded and have and can find a direction by common action. That's my idea. And so I found it difficult to bring Hammarskjöld's roles to this role, and I found it very interesting to see how the daring leadership concept helped to explain his the way he used his position, and also to explain how the youth for climate change in Sumatra also work together, and there's this sense of providing a context, and not only providing context but also color, and so this is really a movement.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Monica and Max and Andy, for the great discussion. We have received some questions from the audience.
Oh, wonderful.
The first one from Martina, actually she's asked 2 questions. So the first one is for all of you. Max, you can start, I think. So Martina asks what the issues are that specifically hinder young people from becoming a climate leader.
Yeah, a very, very good question, because there are definitely some hindrances to becoming a youth climate leader. I think one of the key points, which already hinders a lot of people from doing as much as they would like to do, is just also you need to be able to devote time. And the first thing is just you have to have time to pursue what you want to do and to pursue this climate change. And a lot of young people, they cannot afford the luxury to put their time and effort into this issue, because they have to work, they have other financial things, which just don't give them the room to spend their time into this. So I think that's a very, very important hindrance. I also know, so also in the Netherlands, like there was lately a review survey done among all the young people in the Netherlands who are like members of youth organizations, and you see it actually becoming more and more difficult, also with the new study finance system, that students just have a difficult time to spend time on issues like climate change, and you see it even more so in other countries. So I think that's a very, very very big hindrance for young people to get involved. And of course, there are still a lot of other things that are there's. You also have to know about climate change in the first place. That's also an important actor. Yeah, we also talked about it a little bit in the beginning. But also, yeah, it also is easier to do more if you're educated on climate change, if you have the basic knowledge on it. Perhaps also a lot of young people, lack this knowledge or access to resources. If you really are interested in politics and want to make a difference on that side, but it's just not possible for you to find the funding to go to a conference or to go to the capital city for government demonstrations or whatever. That's, I think, also very real hindrances that should be addressed in order to get more people involved. But yeah, I won't talk about it too much because also
it was a very extensive and a very good answer indeed. So I now want to ask the second bit of the question, and it's specifically for Andy.
Yeah.
And Martina asks also how to reach and involve the young people in the rural areas.
Okay, so based on my experience, one of the things that we can do to engage these young people from the rural area is to involve them as many as possible, and then not to talk on behalf of them. I mean, sometimes we are as the one who have access to the information think that we are above them. We know anything that they don't know, but that also make us blind to the thing that to the fact that they face challenges that we don't know. So one of the things that for me that is important to reach and then involve the young people is to let them speak about what they face, the issue that they face in their daily life. I think that's one of the things that we can do. I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very good answer indeed. I hope Martina also thinks that. And then, yeah, Monica, you're of course not that young anymore, but do you want to? Do you maybe know some issues that haven't been mentioned specifically hindrances for the young people?
I think it's important for young people to have spare time to talk to another, not only to prepare actions, but also time for inspiration from maybe philosophy or the art of living, about their values, life perspectives. And in my time, when I was young, we had time in school time. There was time for these discussions, and what I see in this time is missing. So I think education is very important, and also that young people have less stress in their lives, and so there are all kinds of conditions which make that there's so much stress. But you can criticize this aspect as one of the facts of our lifestyle, which is not healthy.
Yeah, thanks for the great answer, Monica. Yeah, indeed, this issue of time and this issue of education is very important in my experience also. So that's why I'm trying to, with not alone of course, but we're trying in the Netherlands to change the national school curriculum so that it involves more time, free time, and free time to spend on, for example, doing something as tackling climate change and becoming a young climate leader. Now we will move on to another question from Dadi. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. She asks a question which I think has been asked very often, but it's still a very, I think, urgent and a very urgent question. So it's about those who are skeptical of climate change, and she asks specifically about our experience in having a discussion with these people. Max, can you start with an answer?
Yeah, the climate skeptics. Of course, I also met them over my career, more than I would like to. I also have to say I met everything on the spectrum. I also met young people who said climate change, it's so bad now that we cannot solve it whatever we try, so I'm not going to do anything anymore. So that's the other end of the spectrum. They think climate change is already so serious that we cannot solve it. We don't have to do anything anymore. And then you have the people on the other side of the spectrum who say like, yeah, climate change, it's just, not real, or it's just a small fluctuation. It will be whatever. So how do you go on about this? I think it is important to know that also in the climate skeptics, there's a different group. Sometimes I met people who were just so fundamentally climate skeptic that I decided not to spend any time on it, because no matter what arguments I proposed, nothing works. They came up with their own graphics and everything you could ever think of. And some people are just so fundamentally in that position that I thought it's going to cost me so much time to work on to discuss, and it cost me so much energy. I'm not going to involve my energy in that. On the other hand, there are also a lot of people who are climate skeptic, but then skeptic in the sense like, I'm not completely sure, or I don't think there is human-induced climate change, but they are open for a discussion or open to hear your point of view at least. And in that sense, I think there is a very, very good reason to tell like why you are yourself convinced that climate change is an issue. It's always useful to just go look at some IPCC documents to have in your bag. It's good to have some documents. Sometimes, it's also, and also the argumentation for different people, different things work. Some people are convinced if you say like, we already lost half of all our coral reefs on the planet, and coral reefs are bleaching every day. You can just see the pictures. Other people are more concerned if you say like, insurance companies, just money-making insurance companies, they don't want to. They're going to upgrade their premiums because of climate change is giving more damage. So your premium is already getting higher because of climate change. And then the people say, if the insurance companies are going on. So I think you have to just also really look who's the person standing in front of me, and then adapt your argument to fit the person. But if the person is so fundamental, then sometimes it's also just not worth to invest your energy in it. I think that's my view.
Okay. Thank you very much for that view. I think it was, again, very extensive indeed. Andy or Monica, I think, Andy, do you have something to add to that very extensive answer?
Oh. I'm very interested in your background, and so this is the first time that we meet, and so I like to meet you another time and maybe see what you are doing, and which projects you are involved with, and I would like to stay into contact.
Okay, that's same for me. But we'll still have a quick question for Max. Someone is asking for the source of the review you mentioned earlier.
Wait, I can switch back to it if you want to share the screen quickly. So just to check this one, I guess. The source, it's from it's a thesis. It's from the university thesis from a fellow student of mine. I don't think it's published online yet, but if the person who asked the question wants to have the picture or the full document, then I can email that to the person.
Also, I think that review under young people, that's at this or the outcome.
Okay, cool. That is the document is in Dutch. It's by the Dutch National Youth Council. And
maybe you can post a link.
I'll post the link to the document
chat on
in the chat.
YouTube.
Oh yeah, on YouTube. Yeah, I'll try to do that. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think I'm going to round it up for this webinar, as time has certainly elapsed. So I think that one of the main things that we learned today is that time is definitely an issue if you want to become a young climate leader, and that maybe via education or financial funds that more time can be made free. Also, it is important, as Monica said, that your spirit and your inspiration is there in order to be a climate leader, because otherwise you will not cope with it long. And the very interesting thing that Max further said is that you do not have to go to a UN conference to be a climate leader. You can just be one in your own neighborhood or your own municipality. You can start doing something tomorrow. Now, that was it for this lecture webinar. In 3 weeks' time, we will have the next webinar, which will be on the subject of transparency. Different people, the same series on this same channel. Thank you very much, Max, Monica, and Andy, and also Janti and Sharif for the organization. It was very nice talking to you, and we will certainly stay in contact. Then I would also like to thank the Energy Academy Indonesia for hosting this webinar. And well, thank you everyone for listening, and I wish you good luck with becoming a climate leader yourself. Yeah, thank you everyone.